And what we're going to talk tonight about is called the somatosensory map. It basically has to do with our brain and how our brain's wired, how it's set up, and how that affects how we heal ultimately. But in the most basic sense is, how does it even help us to get around? Like, how do I not trip over everything that I'm just walking by? I might do that anyway, but how am I able to navigate around corners? How am I able to not fall? And as people get older, you see this happens more. So we're going to kind of talk about how the brain's set up, and understanding how that map is will help you to kind of understand how making sure that your brain is connected to what you're doing, and the best it's connected means best health for you guys. That's ultimately the key. So in the first section of kind of unpacking the science, we're going to talk a little bit about reaction times, all right? So these reaction times here, we have an article, so if you don't hear anything I say, that's fine, because it's actually right out there. You can read most of that. What we want to study when science looks at our brains is one of the simplest things is how do people react? How fast can we react to things? And how does reacting quickly help us to become less accident prone and more like a ninja? We want to be that ninja. When you guys get adjusted by me, you feel the ninja. What's helpful is to do research and study on how does chiropractic care affect the ability to react. So there's actually been a number of studies done. One was more interesting than the others a little bit, because what they did was they actually took chiropractic patients and they treated them for 12 weeks. They received chiropractic care for 12 weeks, and they would have to stand on the Dance Dance Revolution game. When you kind of tap things as they light up, they would tap how quickly they could tap those lights. And they would measure them initially, of course, and they treated them for about 12 weeks, and then they retested them. They were actually 2.5 times greater than the other group that actually just did exercise. So their reaction time was 2.5 times faster than people who just did exercise for 12 weeks. So if you just went I'm going to get better at this, I'm going to practice moving my leg, which is good. We want you guys to exercise. It paled in comparison to how quickly people could react to those lights, brain, body, all of the leg movements with an adjustment. Why? Because ultimately our brain and bodies must be connected. And chiropractic care connects our brains and our bodies. If that information is fuzzy, if it's distorted in any way, you're not going to react as quickly or as well. Your brain will be a little bit confused about the information. So when we start to talk about the somatosensory map, I know I had some patients who thought that it was a technique I was going to teach them. Unfortunately, it's not a technique I'm going to teach you tonight, but you can probably use it to understand a little bit more about our bodies. On your brain, I opened up my skull for you, and I showed you kind of the top of the brain. There would be strips of area that we call a motor area and a sensory area. So the somatosensory just means the sensations that my soma, or my body, send to my brain. There's a map, and that somatosensory map basically maps out your whole body like in a strip. It would show you the whole body, like our whole body kind of laid on top of this area of our brain. So if I stretch my body out, it'd be over the area. But what's different is if you look at the map, you'll realize it's nowhere near looks like us, because your brain puts a ton of energy and nerve endings into hands, you could imagine, right? Feet. So if you look at this person, they look like they have humongous hands and feet compared to what the body is saying. Hey, the body puts emphasis on important parts. The face and head, right? Ears, eyes, nose, senses, hands and feet. So how does that relate to us and help to understand? Well, if you have back pain, your back on this map, you can't even really see it. Very little of it is even mapped on your brain, which means that any signals that come from your back or your body go up to your brain, and the brain has to interpret that signal. Well, because it doesn't have as many nerve endings in your back, it has to make up a story a little bit. And it says, well, there's some signals coming from down that in that area. Not exactly sure if it's inside the back or outside the back, or, it gets a little fuzzy. That's what people, when you have you're like, oh, it's kind of in that area, the brain can't perceive it like it could your fingertip. If I took 2 needles and I put them this far apart and I poked on my back, I could say that's 2 needles. We did this in school. It was a fun little experiment. But as soon as we'd get within an inch or so, it feels like 1. Because that whole area just sends to the brain, says, yep, it's here. On your finger, you could feel them as close as you could possibly make them. You could tell it's 2 finger sticks within a millimeter or 2 of those 2 needles. So your brain has nerves that go everywhere throughout your entire body. And those nerves, not only do they sense what's going on and give the brain feedback, then there's also the motor cortex, which then the brain uses to send signals back out to say how to react, right, to these things. Your brain and your body are constantly communicating, and the more accurate and precise the information is, better it can react. If I put, those like blurry goggles on you, you're going to run into things. You're not going to see as well. That's your brain trying to interpret what's going on to some degree in small areas of your body when you're subluxated. So when your body's misaligned or subluxated, it's getting a fuzzy signal. In your brain, on those maps, your body will have something called blurring, which means that let's say I injure my fingers, this finger, and I say I want to tape it, to the other finger, I want to buddy tape it. And I don't know, for some odd reason, I never unbuddy tape it for a while. Long time, months, maybe. My brain would stop getting signals of bending and moving that finger, which ultimately would cause that part of my somatosensory map to blur into kind of this finger's area and maybe part of that hand, which would mean that the brain, when it says a signal from that area that was blurred, it's saying, I just move all that at once instead of individually being able to move them. So blurring happens when we kind of stop sending signals to our brain in certain areas. Your spine has a bunch of little muscles around it. It has muscles surrounding it, almost like, you probably heard of your rotator cuff, right? Your rotator cuff. But your rotator cuff, you've heard of that, is a stabilization muscles. They're just, there's 4 muscles that kind of surround and protect and keep that joint in its socket. If those muscles are working properly, when you go to move, they stabilize it from just going haywire and jamming into other tendons or muscles or hurting the bone. Their job is to stabilize movement. In your spine, you have little rotator cuff muscles, for lack of a better term, but little stabilization muscles all along your spine. They connect every single segment of your spine, connected by a bunch of little muscles. Those muscles stabilize you from moving. When you go to move, they contract. And if you've had injuries, if you've been laid up and not moved for a while, if you sit for a long time, if you beat them up so much you've lifted too many things that those muscles eventually just quit on you and you became subluxated, those little stabilization muscles kind of get turned off. So you have less of stability, and ultimately what happens when the brain perceives that there's things not moving right, it actually gets the bigger muscles in your body to clamp down. Then people are like, it's spasming. My body, I think it's a muscle, and it is. When you're subluxated, you have excessive stress and strain on your body in the muscles, the tendons, the ligaments. If it's been a long time, those tendons and ligaments shrink. They tighten down. So if you had a posture where you started to kind of lean forward because of pain, but you hadn't moved, those areas change. And those ligaments and tendons, you can't just go, and they just go back to normal. They go back like a rubber band. And that's why the frequency of our care is so important initially, and frequency of anything, exercise, sitting right, changing your habits. If you don't consistently do them, your brain blurs, for lack of a better term, up there, and then it starts to move you as a whole unit rather than individual areas. And that leads to injury. Subluxations happen when those individual joints get kind of locked up because the stability is lost and is not moving. We feel that. Someone just today was like, I said, is that tender there? She goes, yeah, how'd you know that? Are you psychic? I said, yes. And? No, I'm not. I said, no. Over time, we get really used to the art of chiropractic is feeling where things don't move well and how it's not giving. And we can feel it immediately. And when it's not, usually it's tender. And the reason it's tender is because the nerves that are around there are trying to protect or give feedback to your brain, but they cause inflammation. So when you have subluxation, you have inflammation. If your diet and your lifestyle leads to more inflammation, well, you're kind of adding fuel to a fire. So this is why we do programs where we try to help you in doing an anti-inflammatory eating program or supplements, because this all is part of this process. But kind of understanding the simplicity of when I make an adjustment, I turn back on those little stabilization muscles, and then the body should be able to move better. But guess what? It has a memory. And it may have gotten blurred. It may turn back on and gets a little bit of wake-up call in that area of your brain, and the brain goes, oh yeah, I kind of remember that signal. That was actually from that L4 area. But right now, I'm just kind of treating it as a whole lumbar area. But we have to keep repeating that. And eventually, your brain is plastic. It can change. It can change for the worse. It could change for the better. So as we change the brain, we make adjustments to change the brain. And then we ask you to do exercises and stretches and move your body so that it continues to get stimulation to the areas we just freed up. When you do that, you start to reconnect connect the nerve endings that were sort of dead, for lack of a better term, cells that had died in your brain. And you start to wake back up the body's natural response to saying, hey, this happened. I feel we're here. And now I'm going to do this reaction. So reaction time, being that ninja warrior, means keeping your body in alignment, keeping your body moving. The adjustments are the best to reboot. It's kind of like in the fuse box of your house gets tripped and we reboot it. That's a little bit more on and off. It's really not that simple. But little things do get turned off, and we can turn small areas onto the spine, and we do that repeatedly, your body heals. You can adapt. Ultimately, our care is there to help you adapt to stress. And when I say that, usually we might go to my work or things going on in my life, but stress comes from other areas, not just, that we perceive emotionally, but physically. We may work in a job where we're pulling wires out all day. I don't know anyone that's doing it. We might be stuck on a computer all day. You might be hunched over a table like me all day. But those are stressors on our body, micro traumas. We may be putting toxins in our bodies with the foods that we're eating. We may even be lied to and saying some of them are good because our society is really good at marketing to us things that probably aren't good that sound good for some reason or another. That's why they fortified cereal, because they realized we got to make something good about this stuff. There is the reason that Fruit Loops are spelled with an F-O-O-T is because they couldn't call it fruit, because there's zero fruit in Fruit Loops. Just think about that. But we call it fruit, I even pronounce it like it's a fruit. But no, it's Foot Loops. The only thing they're adding to is a lot of color, which is not good. So we're good at getting marketed into the wrong things. The truth is that your bodies were destined to be great, to heal, to adapt. But we have stressors coming from so many levels. And if our body can't adapt to all of them, we trip the breaker. Our map of our brain gets blurred and we start to dysfunction. We all have a point in our life that we might not go live past. But while we're here, and those that we care about, it's best that they know how to get checked. They get checked by the chiropractor. One of the simplest and easiest things you can do is to get checked, and do that regularly. If you're under stress in a lot of ways, get checked more often, because likely there's things that start to dysfunction. And those do lead to disease and injuries that we may not be able to undo. So the message tonight that I want to kind of get past is, the brain does an amazing job to map your body. There's a blueprint of health inside your brain, and that coordinates movements and the sensations in your whole body. Misalignments or interrupted nerve signals distort all of this. They lead to pain and dysfunction. Chiropractic care helps to restore that alignment and that nerve flow. We recalibrate your brain. We reboot. Reduce discomfort, it helps overall health and balance. We do these workshops because we know that our patients deserve to know how not to keep getting into the same problems that they are. We do these because there's a lot of people that don't know the truth about their bodies and how to heal. And if your friends at work hadn't told you to see a chiropractor, you still might not have. Yeah. Right? It's kind of our duty to at least share what we've learned. And tonight, you are tasked tonight to say to one person this week that I see the chiropractor. It could be the person on checkout. It could be someone you care about. But I think that the more that we start to get the word out that natural health care is a start, not a finish, the better our society can be. And that's why we do this. It's not just for the people inside these walls. It's because outside these walls, if we have a healthier, happier community, we have less people yelling at each other on the roads. We've got less things that are going on that really stress life out. So my hope and prayer is that, you just share the fact that getting checked is a normal thing, just like eating healthy, brushing your teeth.